Okay, I think it is a good moment to start. Good afternoon. My name is Alejandro Behr. I'm the director of the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Minnesota. Thank you all for joining us today on the occasion of International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I would like to thank our guest, Matthias Haas, who is connecting from Berlin at a very late time of the day. Thank you, Matthias. And my gratitude goes also to my colleagues and affiliate faculty members of the center, Leslie Morris, Hiromi Mizuno, and Daniel Schroeter. And we welcome the students of their courses, the Holocaust, Memory, Narrative History, and Global History of World War II. And I will now turn it over to my colleague Sandra Alfers, who is the director of the Ray Woolpo Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocides, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University. Thank you again all for joining us. And Sandra, thank you to you too.
Thank you, Alejandro. Good afternoon, good morning to everyone. Good evening to Berlin. Thank you for joining us. And I would like to begin this morning by acknowledging, even though we're meeting in cyberspace and not on campus, that both the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Minnesota and the Woolpo Institute at Western Washington University stand on native lands. The University of Minnesota on Minnesota Makoche, the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Dakota Oyate, and Western Washington University on the traditional, ancestral, and contemporary homelands of the Coast Salish people, namely the Lummi Nation and the Nooksack tribe. We call upon our participants today to reflect upon this fact and to acknowledge the sovereignty and spiritual ownership of their homelands, their place of origin, on which we come together to learn. I also would like to thank Alejandro and the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Minnesota for inviting us to be a partner for this event on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker for our webinar, the Wannsee Conference Now and Then, Dr. Matthias Haas. Dr. Matthias Haas is the acting director of the Education Department at the House of the Wannsee Conference Memorial Site and Education Center in Berlin, Germany. He is the curator of their traveling exhibit, the Wannsee Conference and the Persecution and Murder of the European Jews, which was on display in cities across North America and South Africa. He has worked for several organizations, among them, for example, UNESCO, the Federal Association for Civic Education, and the Kerber Foundation. From 2005 to 2009, Dr. Haas was the director of the US program Action Reconciliation Service for Peace in Philadelphia. He has also worked as consultant, lecturer, and educator in the fields of politics of memory, European integration, and international exchange. In the past few years, Dr. Haas has organized a number of international exchange seminars for Canadian, Polish, German, and American students. He has taught at the Free University in Berlin, from where he also received his degree, at York University in Toronto, Canada, and at Touro College in Berlin. Dr. Haas has also worked at several museums and memorial sites with a focus on the memory of the Nazi past, among them the Topography of Terror Foundation and the House of the Wannsee Conference Memorial Site and Education Center. Among his publications are Survivors, Victims, Perpetrators, Berlin 2018, Holocaust Education in a Global Context, published by UNESCO, Paris 2014, Gestaltetes Gedenken, Yad Vashem, das US-Holocaust Memorial Museum und die Stiftung Topographie des Terrors, Frankfurt-Main, New York City 2002, and The Politics of Memory in Germany, Israel, and the United States of America. Dr. Haas, good evening to Berlin. Welcome to our webinar. We are delighted you are here with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, and I will start sharing my screen. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's a tremendous pleasure for me and an honor to be here with you today. Thank you to the Woolpo Institute and the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Minnesota for inviting me to this lecture, and especially I would like to thank Alejandro Beyer, Joe Eggers, and Sandra Alphas who organized this event. And events like this really show the advantages of the digital world that make it possible, even in these difficult times, to continue our cooperation across the Atlantic. On the 27th of January this year, we mark the 76th anniversary of the liberation of the concentration camp of Auschwitz by the Red Army. Today, it is the International Holocaust Remembrance Day. In Germany, it is the Day of Remembrance of the Victims of National Socialism. And you see there is a slight different focus. On this day, we remember the victims of the Holocaust and of Nazi persecution. We honor the survivors and we listen to their stories. We remember those who perished, individuals, families, communities. We address different groups of victims and their fates. And I think that should be at the center of these days of remembrance. The focus should be on those who suffered, on whose lives we shall not forget. In the process of learning and teaching about the Nazi past and the Holocaust, we also focus on this perspective of the victims, and in a way that is always at the core of our work, because also education about the history of the Holocaust has an element of remembrance and memory in it. There's more to it though, and the institution I come from has a different focus. I work, as it was mentioned, at the house of the Wannsee Conference Memorial Site and Education Center, the historic site where the Wannsee Conference was held. So our focus on this history is through the perpetrators and their actions. We do many educational programs with a variety of professional groups, from police and the military to nurses in training and apprentices of chemistry. And of course, we work with school classes. We work with 5 federal ministries and have raised questions about professional ethics. All of our groups work on the history of their profession during National Socialism and the relevance of this history for them in their field of work today. They all address the Wannsee Conference as a key event in the process of persecution and murder of the European Jew. So I will talk today about the Wannsee Conference in its larger historical context, but I will also address its relevance in the wake of rising anti-Semitism in Germany and Europe today. And to be honest with you, a few years ago, I would not have thought that the kind of open anti-Semitism and conspiracy narratives, often with Jews at their center, that we are facing today still exists. It was a painful learning process, which also raised a lot of new questions for our work. And because of that, it might be helpful not only to speak about the Wannsee Conference, and the deportations of the Jews from Europe that led to mass murder, but also about the anti-Semitism prior to that. And I meant to show you at least the photo of the house a little earlier, so but at least that you get an impression of how the site looks if you had not the chance to be there. But now let's go back in history, and let's go back briefly to the end of World War I and the assumed reasons for having lost the war. Germans, think about it, never forget. You see here the German armies in the trenches, and the myth is we are undefeated in battle, undefeated in the battlefield, and we only lost the war because of the stab in the back by the home front. And who is that home front? We see here a political figure, Social Democrat Philipp Scheidemann. And in the back, we see the capitalist here, we see the bankers here, and clearly the stereotypical cliche of the Jews. The political left in the back, the leftists also run by the Jews because the media and the money is Jewish. So the anti-Semitic stereotype is all there, and right at the beginning of the Weimar Republic, which really brings equal rights to the Jews in Germany. They are citizens with full rights. But you have, on the extreme nationalist political right, you have the anti-Semitic ideology. It is the Jews who are targeted, and we of course know that that is the tool for the Nazis to reach out to all social groups in society. Jews are capitalists, Wall Street is Jewish, and that helps to reach out to the political left. And of course, communism, Bolshevism, Moscow are Jewish, and that helps to reach out to the political right. So that is, let's jump through the time of the Weimar Republic and go to the beginning of the Nazi regime. And we have January 1933, the Nazis come to power, and the first groups that are targeted by the Nazis are the political opponents, political left mainly, socialists, communists, unionists, everybody in the end who defended the democratic system. But already in April 1933, we see the first boycott of Jewish stores. Germans fight back, don't buy from Jews. But you see here also, this is an organized boycott, but it's also used for propaganda. And if you can read that here, it's even in English. German, defend yourselves against Jewish atrocity propaganda. Buy only at German shops. So anti-Semitism is something that is promoted, that is advertised, and if, in case the New York Times wants to report about that, or the Chicago Tribune, or any newspaper, we have it already provided in English. So the propaganda towards anti-Semitism is something that the Nazis promote very early on. Anti-Semitism is widespread in society, and it's shown openly, as we see here. Jews are, in the town of Beringersdorf, not welcome. And we see a group here of young boys, Hitler Youth probably, with their group leader. Well, 8-10 years later, these young boys will be soldiers. They might join the SS, but they will be the ones who grow up with anti-Semitism, with anti-Semitic ideology early on. This is just a sign. This is not open violence, but very clearly the Jews are targeted here. Early 1933, 34, 5, that begins. We have anti-Semitism in waves going through the countries. The summer of 1935 brings another wave of anti-Semitism, and here we have a couple, a Jewish man, a Jewish German man, Julius Wolf, and Christine Seemann, his fiancée. They are engaged. In the summer of 1935, their love relationship is not made illegal yet. And still, we see here they are humiliated. I'm a race defiler. The Jewish man is humiliated and has to wear the sign. They are marched through the town of Norden. Policeman is controlling the situation, and it's excitement. It's something is going on. There is for these young kids who want to be in the photograph here. We see all of that. This is quite obvious. Something positive. Well, for the couple, of course, it is not. But this is also very clearly a sign that this is not always a top-down procedure. The government decides to establish anti-Jewish measures. No, at the time, this is a local initiative, the local Nazi party. The people, society knows what is right and what is wrong. And of course, a love relationship between a Jewish man and a non-Jewish woman are not all right. So we see that, and that has consequences on a policy level. 3 months later, at the end of September 1935, the Nuremberg race laws are passed. So we have hundreds of decrees and orders against Jews. Jews can't work for the government. Jews can't shop before 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Jews can't do this. Can't sing in a choir. Can't be in a sports club. But who's Jewish? We need a legal definition. So if you have 4 German-blooded grandparents, you are German. And if you have 4 Jewish grandparents, you are of Jewish blood. And if you have 3 Jewish grandparents, you're Jewish. But then we have being half Jewish or 1/4 Jewish. And how do we deal with people like that? That is something that comes up at the Wannsee conference, and that is something important. 4.5 pages of the protocol of the Wannsee conference deal with that issue. with half Jews and 1/4 Jews, Jews married to non-Jews, with children, without children. And how do we apply these regulations and the measures to these groups? And to keep this short, in the end, the issue was never solved. But for the bureaucracy and the administration, these Nuremberg race laws make it operational. To whom do we have to apply these measures? And here we have still, we don't have deportations. We don't have open, not too much open violence. I mean, we have humiliation, we have people are targeted, people are arrested, but it's not what, compared to what comes later, so horrible. We do have a new level in November 1938. We do have the pogrom night, and the night from the 9th to the 10th of November 1938. Hundreds of synagogues are attacked, community centers, houses, shops destroyed, set on fire. In that night and the first days after, around 800 people are murdered. That is open terror. That is open violence in the cities throughout Germany. We see here a photograph from the city of Baden-Baden. In the morning of the 10th of November 1938, a group of Jewish men is marched from the police headquarters through the town to the synagogue. They are forced into the synagogue, are not allowed to cover their heads, have to read from Mein Kampf, Hitler's infamous book, and then they are arrested and brought to the concentration camp of Dachau. After that night of destruction, around 30,000 men are arrested and brought to the concentration camps. And we can really say that with this, German Jewry of the 200 years prior to that comes to an end. Here, there is no limit in the measures of the regime. And if we look at these groups a little more detailed here, we see a group of men who are all middle-aged. They are all well-dressed. These are citizens. These are ordinary Germans. Germany is their home country for most of them. They are, that's their hometown. And here they are marched by the police and the SS. See the SS here also with a car. We see some civilians here on the side. That's probably Gestapo, marched by the police through the town. And what is important, we have the bystanders here. We have the onlookers, the ordinary Germans, the citizens. And we see here on that line of row of bikes, people come there. People want to be here. We see these men, bakers or masons, taking a break. We have here a father carrying his child on his arm. We have a little boy marching. Who is that boy? We don't know. We don't know. Is he a Jewish boy? And people think that maybe. Probably not. Most likely not. The Jewish family stayed at home the next morning after that night of violence and destruction. They don't go to school. They don't go meet friends. And so this boy is probably a young German boy, wants to help the police. We see here on the side, somebody else is taking a photograph. So we see the lens of look through the lens of the photographer. And so we have a lot of social interactions. And why do these people go there? We don't know. Do they want to see, well, finally this happens to the Jews? Do they maybe show some solidarity? We don't know. But one thing is very clear, the perpetrators always need an audience. They need sort of the silent mass that even in their silence approves of that. With that, we have open violence, and the reactions of the world to these acts of open violence are very limited. And with that, the regime, really the Nazi regime, can continue with their efforts. 10 months later, the war begins. And with the invasion of Poland, and it's not only a war for territory, but also for the racial new order of Europe. And the main target for that are the Jews. With the invasion of the Soviet Union on June 22nd, 1941, the systematic murder of the Jews began. Men, women, children are murdered by the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads of police and SS. And by the end of 1941, prior to the Wannsee Conference, more than 500,000 Jews were already murdered. So this is the setting when the Wannsee Conference was held. So on January 20th, 1942, a meeting took place at Lake Wannsee in Berlin. There was only one topic on the agenda of this work meeting with breakfast afterwards, as it was called in the invitation, and which lasted around 90 minutes only. The final solution of the Jewish question in Europe. How to organize the deportation and murder of 11 million Jews of Europe. Reinhard Heydrich, the head of the Reich Security main office, invited 15 officials from the police, the SS, the administration of the occupied territories in Eastern Europe, the party chancellery, and other various ministries. And Heydrich had three goals for this meeting. And one was he wanted to highlight his leading role in the organization of the genocide. He wanted to secure cooperation of the participants and to make also, and that's the third, to make everybody aware of what final solution meant, mass murder. Heydrich's initial planned conference date was December 9th, 1941, and had to be changed following the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, and Germany then declared war on the United States on December 12th, 41. But let us have a look at Europe at the time. And on this map, you see the German Reich in the middle here, and you see the light blue countries that are the countries occupied by Nazi Germany. From France, really to the outskirts of Moscow, from Norway to Greece. Fascist Italy is an ally to Nazi Germany. And then we have these countries here, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, Slovakia, semi-independent countries. If they don't behave accordingly, and they are right-wing authoritarian regimes, but if they don't behave accordingly, they will be invaded, as it is the case with Hungary in March 1944. The continent is conquered by Germany and, yeah, the Battle over Britain. It seems a matter of time. But here, for the men who come and attend this meeting, this is the setting, the political, geopolitical setting. We can, whatever we plan to do, the racial new order of Europe, mass murder, why? Because we have the power to do so. We are winning. It's a battle of winning and losing. The eternal battle of races has come to an end point, and we are winning. That is the mentality, and the main target here are the Jews. This meeting was not about decision-making, and the decision probably to murder all Jews of Europe was made during this period, and historians are still debating, and I keep this short, but probably, we don't have a key document, the sign order of Hitler, but probably in December, so a few weeks before the Wannsee Conference, we have meetings between Himmler and Hitler where we think, most historians think, that decision was made to murder all Jews of Europe. So this is the setting. Now let's have a look at who was here. We see Heydrich here, who was at the meeting, and he brings his staff. He brings the head of the Gestapo. He brings two police commanders. I will come back to them in a minute. He brings his expert for Jewish affairs, Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann is probably the most known of the participants because he becomes the logistic expert later on, and is the one who organizes the deportations from all over Europe to the death camps in occupied Eastern Europe. And the other people who Heydrich invites are colleagues. They are not in the ranks of ministers. These are permanent secretaries of the ministries, Staatssekretäre in German. So we don't probably know many of them. Heydrich is relatively prominent, but another leader of one of the main offices of the SS, Otto Hofmann. We have the party chancellery here from the Nazi party, Dr. Klopfer. We have the Reich chancellery, Hitler's administration. We have the occupied territories in the east, the general government, that part of Poland that is occupied and not annexed, and the occupied territories of the Soviet Union and the Baltic states. And then we have ordinary governmental administration, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of the Interior, the Foreign Office, and the plenipotentiary of the 4-year plan, economic planning. But let's make no mistake. I mean, it's not that these people are less ideological. We see Mr. Stuckert, Dr. Stuckert here in his SS uniform. Even though he is the head of a civilian ministry, he has the rank of a general of the SS as well. And if we would have that enlarged, we see sometimes their party buttons on the sleeves of their suits. What do they have in common? And not very much. They are relatively young. Most of them are born between 1900 and 1910, but the average age of them is 42. That is pretty young for the ranks they are holding. They all come from middle-class families. 11 of them are Protestants, 3 are Catholics. One is a believer in God, so the Nazi Gottgläubig, the Nazi form of religion. We have the majority, 9 of them are Prussians, 2 from Saxony. So even that is 1 from Württemberg, 1 from Bavaria. 7, almost half of them had fought in World War I, but 8 belong to the war youth generation, too young to fight in World War I. 10 of the 15 went to university. 8 of them had been awarded doctorates. Of course, that was easier back then. But of course, these are well-educated young men, and they are convinced of what they are doing. But other than that, they are pretty average for their generation. One person is not mentioned here, and I think it's worth talking about her. A secretary. We see here these 50 men that talk about it, but we have the key document, and we come to that in a minute. We have a secretary taking notes. Why is that interesting, and why didn't anybody care about it earlier? For a long time, nobody wanted to find out about her. Oh, the secretaries are not interesting and important, which is too bad. Now a colleague of mine in the last 2 years did some research and found out it was a secretary at the meeting. She took the notes that were provided Eichmann with the information to really write the protocol in coordination with Reinhard Heydrich. So she is probably from the office of Eichmann, the secretary. We don't have a photo of her. She was born in 1919, but she's a pretty young woman at the time. She only passed away in the year 2010. People could have maybe talked to her and asked her. She was interrogated a few times after the war, but why is that interesting and important? It's a regular work meeting. It's a work meeting with breakfast afterwards, and somebody is taking notes. This is not, it's an important meeting in the process of understanding the persecution and murder of the European Jews. But in their work procedures, this is a meeting, they high ranking, okay, they have a secretary taking notes and then writing the protocol. And to understand that mentality of the perpetrators, I think this is quite interesting. So Eichmann took the notes of the secretary and wrote the protocol, and he really was responsible for Jewish affairs and in the Reich Security main office, and then was responsible in the coming months and years for organizing the Holocaust. He used coded language to summarize the results of the discussion, and the plans are really only outlined. Let's have a look at the protocol. Let's look what we see here. Protocol page number 1, it's a secret Reich matter. We have 30 copies. This is number 16. That's the only copy that survives. Page and a half tells us who's attending. And on page 5, we have a paragraph, and I'm going to read that to you. As a further possible solution, and with the appropriate prior authorization by the Führer, emigration has now been replaced by evacuation of the Jews to the east. However, these operations should be regarded only as provisional options, though, in view of the coming final solution of the Jewish question, they are already supplying practical experience of vital importance. Now, the question is, what are these practical experience that they are talking about? And to understand that, that's the language we will find throughout the protocol, and they don't say a lot. But if we look at Mr. Lange, Dr. Lange, who was from the security police in Latvia, from the city of Riga, we will come a little closer to understand what these practical experiences were. Dr. Lange is on the 19th of January still in Riga. On that day, a train arrives from Theresienstadt Teresin with 1,000 Jews via Berlin to Riga. On that day, the Jews, 1,000 people, are unloaded, put on trucks, brought out to the woods, unloaded, walked to the woods, and shot one by one. 1,000 people by the troops under the command of Rudolf Lange. He is the commander of this killing, goes on a plane, flies to Berlin, and attends this meeting with bloody hands. We have to be very clear on this. That is the practical experience that they probably are talking about. They have experiences with mass murder. Dr. Lange and Dr. Schöngard from the general government are the practitioners of mass murder. And they have efficiency problems. It's too long to get into that, of time and money and bodies. And the perspective of the perpetrators is we need a better way to kill people. We have also experiences with the euthanasia killings, people with disabilities who were murdered in the nursing homes and hospitals inside of Germany. And that personnel was transferred then to the death camps in Eastern Europe. So that is practical experience of vital importance. The protocol continues on page number 7. In the course of the final solution and under appropriate direction, the Jews are to be utilized for work in the East in a suitable manner. In large labor columns and separated by sexes, Jews capable of working will be dispatched to these regions to build roads, and in the process, a large number of them will undoubtedly drop out by way of natural reduction. And it continues on page number 8. Those who ultimately should possibly get by will have to be given suitable treatment because they unquestionably represent the most resistant segment and therefore constitute a natural elite that, if allowed to let go free, would turn into a germ cell of renewed Jewish revival. Brackets, witness the experience of history. Brackets. That is all that is needed. There's no word of gassing, of shooting, of murdering people. But everything is clear. We have here, people have to work, and we work them to death. And the people who survive that will have to be given suitable treatment. And there's only one way to understand that. They will be murdered. For the perpetrators, that's enough to understand what was meant. And bureaucratic language, secretive language, helps in covering this up. After the Wannsee Conference, the deportations from all over Europe begin to the death camps. Sobibor, Treblinka, Belzec, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Majdanek, and Chelmno near the Łódź ghetto. So those are the 6 killing centers to where all the trains from all over Europe go and murder Jews. At the time of the Wannsee Conference, we have around 75% of the victims are still alive. A year and a half later, at the end of 1943, 75% are dead. So we have the machinery of death working in a very short time, very efficiently. What's the number that these people plan? And that's on page 6 of the protocol. We see here categories A and B. Category A, the countries we have are already under control. Altreich, that's Germany. The Ostmark, that's Austria. And category B, the countries where we either have to send our diplomats, we have the Foreign Office here, and Bulgaria has their own government, Bulgaria, or England, where we have to win the war. Altogether, the plan is to murder 11 million Jews of Europe. And it's very clear to everybody who attends this meeting. And coming back to the 3 goals that Heydrich had, securing his leading role, asking for cooperation from the attending ministries and organizations, and making everybody aware what final solution meant, he had reached 2 of them quite easily. His authority was backed by a letter of Göring, and he made everybody aware what final solution meant. The third was a little more difficult. He was asking for cooperation for a program of mass murder. It was phrased in the invitation to parallelizing of the procedure, Parallelisierung der Linienführung. In order to have one procedure of the Europe-wide deportations for the death camps in occupied Europe, Heydrich needed cooperation. His troops were not enough. And that is the result of the Wannsee Conference. Everybody was willing to cooperate. Nobody hesitated and looked for a way out. They looked at their field of work was not affected, but other than that, they cooperated. So here at Wannsee, the murder of the European Jews was not decided, but it was coordinated by leading bureaucrats and how it was going to be implemented and carried out. And the deportations were a central part of that. The perpetrators who gathered in Wannsee joined their Nazi convictions rooted in racial anti-Semitism with a sober and objective understanding of the bureaucratic profession to create an effective plan for the genocide of the European Jews. The Wannsee Conference signifies the willingness of German state offices to cooperate in the Holocaust. The conference participants became accessories to and perpetrators of the genocide, with several agencies and hundreds of thousands of civil servants and police participating in its execution. What we see here are the most extreme crimes of the Nazis, crimes against humanity and genocide. And I just mentioned that the convictions of the perpetrators rooted in racial anti-Semitism. But what is interesting is that we know little about the concrete forms of the anti-Semitism of the participants at the meeting at Wannsee. At this point, in January 1942, there is no need to talk any longer about it. It's at the core of everything they do. The Jews are the enemy. The Jews have to disappear. That's so clear to them, they do not need to bring this up. And this clarity of hatred against Jews did not come up suddenly, surprisingly, but it grew over time and was deeply ingrained in the minds of these men and in the minds of millions of ordinary Germans. And it was deeply embedded in the policies of the German state and often at the core of it, on all levels of government and state bureaucracy. The level of anti-Semitism in the 1920s and 1930s that I introduced you to briefly are not unimportant because in comparison to the atrocities that were committed after 1939, they were not as horrific. They are important to understand that the persecution did not start suddenly in 1939 or 40 or 41, but they developed over time and there were signs that things were utterly wrong. And that is why it is important to look at our world today. Don't look for the big horrific crime. Let us look at some smaller events and crimes. And that brings me to the second part, why are current forms of anti-Semitism and conspiracy narratives so troubling. And I would like to give you a few examples. You see here at the door of the synagogue in Halle. On the 19th of October 2019, which was Yom Kippur, the highest Jewish holiday, a neo-Nazi attacked the synagogue in Halle, where 51 congregants had gathered. He shot at the synagogue door and tried to get in, but did not manage to get into the synagogue. And instead, he killed 2 people outside, a woman who was walking by, and a man in a nearby fast food stand. The perpetrator streamed his attack live on the internet, and during the attack, he denied the Holocaust, claimed feminism led to lower birth rates, leading to mass immigration, and he blamed the Jew to be responsible for these issues. And this was one of the most violent examples of right-wing extremism. But what is striking is the mixture of ideological elements in this Weltanschauung, and at the center of this, the hatred of Jews. Another few very different examples that we see here. We see at the demonstrations against anti-corona measures of the government. Some people feared that there will be mandatory vaccinations by the government. And because they have opposed this, they marked themselves with a yellow star and the inscription Impfgegner, vaccination opponent. And there's no time, and we can do that maybe in the discussions to get into the absurdity of this, but I think this is very telling. We have one of the key figures in this conspiracy theories is Georges Soros. He's targeted as somebody trying to run the world in his philanthropic activities. And you see him here in the spider web, and the Jewish World Conspiracy reference is pretty obvious here. And there are more very strange and disturbing comparisons. A young woman in Hanover who introduced herself on stage as Jana, 22 years old, compared herself to Sophie Scholl at a demonstration against anti-corona measures and saw herself in the resistance, like Sophie Scholl with the group The White Rose, and the people were arrested and then executed by the Nazi regime. She sees herself in the resistance because she took part in democratic procedures, distributing leaflets, going on a demonstration, engaging in debates. It is, I think, quite obvious that something is going on here. Current events are directly linked to the Nazi past, and anti-Semitism is at the ideological center of many of these issues, no matter how constructed, absurd, and crazy the arguments are. There is obviously no direct link from Jana in Hanover to the men who met at Lake Wannsee in Berlin. But the context of the meeting on January 20th, 1942 in Berlin are the years before, leading up to deportation and mass murder. The poisonous language of the 1920s and 30s, the widespread anti-Semitism, the small and not so small actions against Jews, bureaucratic and openly violent, led to a common understanding of Jews as the enemy. And at a certain point, there was no need any longer to argue why the Jews are the enemy. The common understanding on all levels of society that the Jews were the enemy and that they had to disappear was deeply rooted. And when asked to participate, only few opposed and refused to do so. Words matter. The public discourse matters. And the few who start spreading hatred and lies need the bystanders and enablers who remain silent for their hatred and lies to grow. If nobody speaks out, their ideology can spread and conspiracy narratives gain ground. To engage in public debate, to call out the liars and ideologues cannot start early enough, and it is not enough to call them fools and laugh at their nonsense. As we see in our world, there is a risk that the nonsense, and with it hatred, division, and violence, become powerful forces in our societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Matthias, for this very rich and at the same time concise and compelling presentation. We have now approximately 15 to 20 minutes for questions, comments from the audience, from the students of the different classes. And I would like to open it up for the chat, for you to post questions in the chat. And Sandra, feel free to help me out here and join us. So we have already several questions, and you are seeing them too, right, Matthias?
I think I do.
So, I mean, maybe we can group them somehow, right? What we're seeing here. Actually, let me ask you a question while others might start posing the question. Then we'll group them and give them back to you. There was something I found quite striking in the examples that you showed us. No, on the one hand, those that are against vaccines, the Impfgegner using the yellow star, and then someone comparing herself with Sophie Scholl. But would you consider these as manifestations of anti-Semitism, or is this just the absolute like a weaponization of the Holocaust, or with the analogies to the Holocaust? To an extent, we might even say that this is Holocaust education completely gone wrong. People know about this and employ it in the public sphere, employ it in public discourse. So the first question I'd like to ask you, and meanwhile I would like to invite everyone to.
It's always hard. How do we measure that? How do we really find out? It's what I find interesting, and I would usually be very careful and cautious to say, look, let's not overstate. Let's be, and that terminology of the Third Reich, of the Nazi past, is used as a weapon and very powerful. That is quite obvious. But if we then look a little deeper and then we get into conversations, and people have done that and tried that, not me personally, but we have some research, it turns out that there is more at work than just showing that star. There is the victims, and the Jewish victims or Jews as victims are not respected. They are not seen, and it seems to be a need to fight that narrative that Jews were the victim and now we are too, and to see yourself as the victim of a dictatorship, of a tyranny, of a totalitarian regime with concentration camps and murder. And so, I mean, this is not only going over the top, but I think there's more at work, which is not so visible maybe at the surface. But I think if we look a little deeper, and I've worked with colleagues, with professors in exchange programs, where I was always, when they were, oh, come on, we have to be careful. I said, oh, come on, let's not overstate. And usually they were right. Usually, I think, and that is what we see here too. We see, or we saw in the beginning, that people thought maybe they didn't get their lessons right, and maybe something was, they misunderstood that. And I think there is not only a misconception, I think there is more at work, and there is an ideological core of that. And that is basically often very clearly anti-Semitic.
I think if I may follow up on that, I see a number of questions coming through in the chat. Thank you. That raised the question, now that we have this happening, what is being done about it? How do we confront anti-Semitism? How do we confront this narrative that comes up, for example, in the pandemic times? And I think the question would be, what does the memorial site specifically do? And then there's another question about what is being particularly helpful. And here I'll just read the question: what means of countering conspiracy theories, misinformation, and outright lies have been shown to be effective at countering fascist, racist, or other far-right movements? So it's a two-folded question. Matthias, I wonder if you could answer that, also with an eye to the practical work that you do at the memorial site, which is now made being more difficult during COVID times, of course.
Yeah, right now it's quite difficult. But generally, I mean, for a long time we had a right-wing extremist attack, and then the judge, you have maybe a trial, and the judge says, oh, they should go to a memorial site and learn about the Nazi past. Well, I don't think that works. I don't think that, I mean, these, and as one historian once said, you don't need to know anything about the Nazi past from the Holocaust to understand that you should not murder another person. So but oftentimes society gives memorial sites the responsibility to deal with all the difficult issues that society doesn't want to deal with. And that is, for example, dealing with racism, right-wing extremism, anti-Semitism. Let's teach them about the past, and then they will be immune for the present. And I don't think that works that way. I think we have, memorial sites have an important role to play. We can only understand who we are as society if we know our past. We are who we are because of that past. And that is important to understand, that to deal with issues today. But these are issues of civil society, of the police, of the justice system, of the government, all together. Not only if we say, oh, we don't deal with it, you memorial sites deal with it. I think that it cannot work. As open societies, we have to deal with these issues, and we will probably not make them go away. And if we look carefully in the post-war times, we see it was never gone. It was always there. We have, I mean, the old Nazis and the neo-Nazis, and the attacks always there, sometimes more visible and sometimes less. But it's not a phenomenon which is new. The quality of it, what we have right now, the international cooperation of these hate groups, is quite threatening. They are in parliaments with some groups that claim not to be as right-wing, just populist, but the connections to the right-wing outside groups are clearly there. And in Germany, AfD, I think, is, I mean, and that's right now the debate, should they be, should the intelligence service have a look at them? But I think there, for a long time, I think the threat and the risks and the dangers were minimized, and would say, oh yeah, send them to memorial sites. I think on all levels of society, they have to be addressed. They have to be clearly addressed. We have within the police forces, within the military, right-wing extremism, which for a long time nobody looked at. and we still have debates. And within the government, the Federal Minister of Interior said, well, we don't need really a research group looking into that. Colleagues disagree. The public on a lot of levels disagrees. I think we need to be open. We need to be critical. And I think it doesn't mean that if we look at the police and the right-wing extremism within the police, that we say the police is racist or right-wing extremist. But there are, like everywhere in society, they are part of society. And of course they are there. They have nothing to do there, I think. I think for working for a democratic society prohibits these people to work there. But that's so, I think the task is for everybody. To say because we have that the memorial sites failed, well, I think is in a way polemic. We can't prove that. Maybe things would be worse if the memorial sites would not have been there. So that is, I think, but we cannot only look at historic sites dealing with the past and dealing with the specific past. If we deal with our history, we deal really with the tremendous crimes. But nobody probably is planning a new mass murder of millions of people right now. It will be different, have different forms, but that's why we have an important role to play, working with professional groups, looking at their responsibility, their ethics, because these bureaucrats thought they behave in their range of professional ethics. They didn't see themselves as being evil. So, and that there, I think we have a responsibility and have to work on that. But I think every group, every professional group, every social group has to confront that. And if we just say, oh, I just have nothing to do with that, I remain silent, we are citizens. And I think that matters.
Thank you, Matthias. There's so many interesting and great questions in the chat, and I think you all can see them. Let me also say that we had we have 233 persons right now attending this lecture. So we're a big community, even if we can only see each other here, 4 of us, but we're many. So let me pose 3 questions that are directly related to the Wannsee conference. One is about the filmic and media renditions of the Wannsee conference. David asked about the HBO film Conspiracy and what your take is on that. There's another question about why Wannsee, why that specific location was chosen for the conference. And then there is a very interesting question by Nicola Faron regarding the secretary who took the notes at the Wannsee conference. How was your colleague able to find out more about her after she had been ignored? If you could tell a little bit more about that.
The site is a villa built 1914-15 by an industrialist, quite impressive. And it was used as a guest house for the SS at the time of the meeting of the conference. And probably some of the people, especially the police commanders from Eastern Europe, were housed there. And Heydrich probably wanted to show off also, wanted to make he wanted a meeting away from the offices inside of Berlin. It was a secretive meeting, but it was also a meeting he wanted to control. He had goals with this meeting, and so he wanted to be in charge of everything, the setting, the agenda, the whole conversation. And I think he was successful with that, and in that respect, the villa played a role. The villa was not Aryanized, it was not owned by Jews prior to that. I think there is, in some of the movies, is that myth. That's not true. But so in a way it's coincidental, the place, and in a lot of ways it's not, because he wanted a sort of a secretive, powerful place to have. And if you go there today, I think the contrast of the history and the site is striking. It's a beautiful site. It's this park around there and the villa. The movies. A movie is always a movie. You have a good, a bad, and an ugly one. It has to be exciting. It has to be controversy. So we don't know. We don't know how the meeting really went. We have 15 pages of the protocol, and that's it. And we have side documents prior to that, after that, reference to the meeting, but not a word protocol of the meeting. So it's a work meeting that was dominated by Heydrich. He probably spoke a lot. He dominated the meeting. It might have been pretty boring, without controversy. there were some disagreements in the conspiracy in the conspiracy movie, excuse me. I think the Ministry of Interior, Stuttgart, and Mr. Kritzinger from the Vice Chancellery are presented as having doubts and struggling, having internal struggles. We have no reason to believe that that is the case. Mr. Stuttgart worked as a commentator of the Nuremberg race laws already in 1935. We have the laws, and then we have the legal commentary. He was involved with that as a lawyer already, so he didn't have any doubts. He tried to present himself after the war as being almost in the opposition or resistance, but he was not, because with the half Jews and 1/4 Jews, he opposed their deportations. But generally, he was willing to cooperate, as were many of them. And still, I think both the film from the early 80s and also Conspiracy give us an idea how things could have happened, and they might raise questions to that. We have to be aware these are movies, but still, I think it brings something up where we use them in the classroom as an educator. I'm not opposed to that. I'm not a historian. I'm a political scientist. I have historians or colleagues who says this is not adequate, this is not accurate, we shouldn't. So there is, but if you contextualize it, and if you take your students serious and expect them to be serious movie watchers, I think there is something to be learned from these films and movies as movies. And there is a new production right now in Germany coming out to the 80th anniversary in about a year, carefully looking what was produced, and they just ended filming and shooting the film. And so there will be a new perspective on, I mean, Kenneth Branagh really plays Heydrich in a Shakespearean way. Probably Heydrich was not so Shakespearean. So movies. And then there was a third question, which I forgot.
Maybe we can stay with the conference for a moment longer, since there are some more questions about the conference. And two of them really do wonder if the conference really was just a formality, that had everything been decided, can we assume everyone knew what was coming even before the meeting? So it's about the participants at the meeting and their reaction. Was there any surprise? Was there a debate? The understanding is that the meeting took about 90 minutes, so rather short. So if you could speak a little bit more to that. Was it simply working out the technical and logistical details, or was there more to it? Was there more discussion?
Again, we don't know in detail. What we know is that probably most of them were aware of what was going on already, if not all of them. And then we have to look really, are there doubts? And their historical sources are important, and we don't have all of them. But we have, for example, Mr. Luther from the Foreign Office, who comes to this meeting with a wish list of the Foreign Office. I think these are 8 points, wishes and desires from the Foreign Office. We want to be part of that. And we have our own idea how we can bring our ideas into that cooperation with the Rice Security Main Office. So we do have people who are willing to cooperate. There was no surprise. We have already, from the Foreign Office, for example, cooperation between Eichmann and Franz Rademacher, who is in the Foreign Office in charge of Jewish affairs. And the question is that in Serbia, there is no SS, but they don't know what to do with the Jews, and Rademacher calls Eichmann. And we have a handwritten note then from Rademacher on his documents that says, Eichmann suggests shooting them. What to do with the Jews of Belgrade? Let's shoot them. So we have the cooperation in the program of murder already. We can assume that on that level, they were aware of that. Were they willing? I mean, we have no reason to believe that they were not willing to cooperate, because if they would have had doubts, they would have known how to play the system. I mean, these are experts. These are the experts of the administration. They know how to run a ministry. So, Comrade Heydrich, yes, of course, we are, as soon as we can, but we are understaffed and we have no personnel, have no resources, difficult times. We can't. Nobody does that. They all look, and that's bureaucrats, look for their own responsibilities. Mr. Neumann from the Economic Planning Office, plenipotentiary of the 4-year plan, only looks for his field of work, slave labor to keep the industrial production up. So he says, look, what about my Jewish slave laborers? You cannot deport them. And then Heydrich says, no, that's been taken care of. Unless they will be replaced by other civilian workers, we will not deport them. And with that, Mr. Neumann is happy, he's satisfied. So he does not get involved in any further debates and discussions. And even if we don't have that on this level, on the protocol, which is coordinated by Heydrich, if there would have been opposition, we would have found out later that people we would have had letters of sort of disagreements, of conflict. And after the war, for the ones who survived, they probably would have shown that and said, see, I opposed it. We don't have any of that. So we can really assume everything leads into willing cooperation.
If everybody is okay with it, we'll go a little bit longer, since there are still several questions. So we won't be able to cover them all, but at least a few. There was this question also, Matthias, about the secretary that took notes at the Wannsee conference. Right. And if I can add one to that, there's also a question whether you could comment briefly on Hannah Arendt's contention that banal careerism was the central driving fact for some of the architects of the final solution. Great question too.
The secretary, I mean, we tended to look at the history of big men. We came away from that when we saw, okay, more people were involved in that contemporary history. We have social groups, but this meeting of the bureaucrats of these 15 men was seen very clearly as, so these are the decision makers. And the lower levels of these people were never seen, for a long time, not seen as being interesting to the researchers. Ingeborg Werlemann, the woman who was the secretary, was interrogated a few times after the war in trials against some of these leading men. And she could never really, yeah, she had been at Wannsee, but I can't really remember when. And that's what she said. And nobody really looked at her, and she probably didn't want to tell anything that she knew, but nobody really looked at the information she gave to find out, was she at that meeting? Were there different meetings? And only in the last years, in the last 8-10 years, really people try to wonder. I have another colleague who called a different secretary, where they had a name and knew this woman was alive, and they called her. And look, are you that person? And she said, don't you ever call me again, and hung up. So even in their late stages of life, these people, these lower ranking people, these women, these secretaries were not willing to talk. But from combining information, Mrs. Werlemann said she was twice at Wannsee, and Heydrich was at the meeting, and she thought it was 44 or something, long after the Wannsee conference. Well, Heydrich is dead in early June 42. And if she had been at a meeting at Wannsee with Heydrich, and she never denied that, it is very likely that it was that meeting. She was the leading secretary of the office of Eichmann. She was the longest serving secretary there. They had a good working relationship. We know that from other sources, and nobody ever looked at that. Nobody thought that this will give us some more information, provide some sort of context in our understanding. Our questions to history always change. Our questions to this meeting and the importance of the Wannsee conference wasn't understood for a long time. And so the surrounding was never really understood or didn't seem to be of interest. And only now it is the case. Now we know who this woman was, who had an interesting career, an interesting life after the war, but never spoke about her history after that. But most colleagues and historians, from putting the things together, assume she was the one. And the other part of your question was?
Well, it's the question about Hannah Arendt's take on
Hannah Arendt. Yes. I think Hannah Arendt is, as a German studying this topic, as a student reading Hannah Arendt's Banality of Evil, Eichmann in Jerusalem, is one of the most influential books. To not think about the Nazi perpetrators as outside the universe coming in from Mars, but being ordinary people and regular bureaucrats. I think this was eye-opening. And I studied that, I read that, and I read the controversy around that, because it sparked a huge controversy within the Jewish world mainly. And I, for a long time, couldn't really understand that. And in contact with Jewish friends who had the first publication of that book in the bookshelf, and I was wowed. And before I could grab it and say that, the friend said, one of the worst books I've ever read. And I was stunned. And then we talked about that, and the tone and the harshness and the German Bildungsbürgerlichkeit, and that's sort of being a German intellectual, which Hannah Arendt was as well. She was Jewish and she was American, but she grew up in this German, I am intelligent, I'm very smart, and I know it, and I will show you. And the way, the ironic, sarcastic style she wrote, and she said that in an interview, well, that's who I am. That's who I am. I think that hurt many people, and I understand that. The tone is cold. And I think the banality of evil is a wrong title. The evil is not banal at all. The evildoers, I think, were pretty banal as human beings. What they did, their deeds were not, how they acted, what they believed in. And Arendt is wrong in believing Eichmann and everything he says. A lot of mistakes, that's all fine. And still, I think so, the evil is not banal. The evildoers on a lot of levels are, because these are ordinary Germans. And in post-war Germany, they could have been the uncles and fathers and grandfathers and neighbors and colleagues at work. And if we see them as that, and I think for that, we can still learn a lot from Hannah Arendt's book. So it depends really how you read it and the perspective on it. And with all the mistakes in it, she's not a historian. I think, and the books have been written about that, and I will not argue the mistakes. And still, there is a lot to learn.
We thought of closing the program with a final question that might be some. I mean, if I would get that question, it would be to see it as a challenging question. But we thought of asking you the following as a closing remark. What would be your recommendation for educators, for Holocaust and genocide educators, but educators more broadly that engage in their classes with questions of antisemitism, racism, and mass violence, and discrimination. In the current climate that we are living, where we're facing so important challenges, both in Europe and also here in the US, would there be 1, 2, 3 recommendations that you could give us?
In our work, we usually we come with a set of things that we think are important, and we think, oh yeah, we want our students to really take this away and that away. And sometimes we have the courage to ask the students, what is your interest? What do you want to know? What's the debate you want to have? Well, that asks a lot of us, because they might come up with something, and then we have to deal with that, because if you ask that question and you mean it, you have to engage. But if we manage to do that and engage them and really take the interest and the question seriously, and not a provocation or something, but to say, to start from there and develop something from there, from that, with all the difficulties and all the unknown, and be transparent in things where there is no answer right now. But I think that might be something where we think also, I mean, for us, the questions are a little different, but how do we still engage students in the interest of history, to become interested in history? Well, they bring their own questions, and these questions for us might be irrelevant at first, but maybe we can combine them with our knowledge and bring things together. And I think to take issues and questions as off as they sometimes seem because of lack of knowledge or whatever it is, I think there is some, as a starting point, and everything we do can only be a starting point or a continuing point in a process of learning. We will not engage in a conversation, and after that, controversial conversation, and after that people say, oh yeah, right, now I got it. It's a process, it's a learning process, but to be taken seriously with issues, with questions that people don't understand, and to see who's asking that question, I think might be something helpful, and engage participants in a learning process. And that's also, I think, a sign of respect, and something where where something happens beyond our control also. I mean, and we have to trust maybe. I mean, I always, in Germany, we had these debates and about the past and did it all really happen? And for a long time, people said, okay, enough of these debates. We don't want to argue any longer. Whenever we had these debates, usually coming from the people who said, enough, let's stop dealing with this altogether, they lost the debate because it turned out society thought the issues are important. The history still is relevant. And I tend to think if people now say, let's end this, bring it on. Let's have the debate. Let's have the controversy. Let's trust our arguments. Will we convince the ideologues? No, no way. There are people I think out there, and not too few, we cannot reach right now. But we can, around them are people who have doubts and ask maybe funny questions. And in Germany, the question is, were it really 6 million? And if an adult who has learned history asks that question, there is an undertone of doubting it altogether. But if a 16-year-old asks that question and really wants to know, how do we know, and poses it in a wrong way, I think we should take that question seriously and say, look, yes, we can answer that. I mean, and I think in the current debates and in the climate, what else can we do? We can't force anybody to learn. We can't force anybody to say that I'm right. I think I am, but we need to have the exchange, and it's painful, it's long. I think it doesn't help to say, I won't talk to you. I mean, there are limits. I think there are limits where there is an end of debate, but to find that thin line and to be willing to pull people in a critical discourse. If as painful as it is for me, it might be painful for them as well. And that is a good start to make it I think it's a difficult process with a lot, and it will take a lot of time. I think now things come up that have developed over in Germany and in Europe and in North America over a longer period of time, and now it just all came up in the last years, and it takes time to deal with it, but it's what else can we do?
And I think, Matthias, thank you for bringing this so well spoken to the end, that this idea of that, of course, this is what democracy is all about, right? We are about exchanging ideas, civil discourse, and that is the way forward, is to engage in civil conversation and reaffirming these values that make us open societies where we can have these conversations and where we are allowed to have them. And can engage in these Streitgespräche, right? Something very German.
I think it also means at a certain point, but facts are facts. I mean, but we have to find there has to be common ground of the world. I mean, the sun's going up, sunrise in the east, and it goes to south, and it's sundown is in the west. And there's no doubt about that. And Earth is not flat. I mean, there has to be a common understanding of that.
Yeah, no, and I think this is a good reminder, and I think a good way to end our program today, to take this to heart for educators, as Alejandro said, but every one of us who's participating in this seminar. And so we do want to thank you for your time today, this evening. It's late in Berlin, and our students and colleagues and friends and community members have their day to go about. But thank you, everyone, at your computer screens for attending, and we hope to see you soon. Stay healthy, be well, and thank you for joining us on this special day.